Photography Daily.
Having a camera to be able to translate that into a photograph, what I'm seeing through the camera, and then, actually seeing it on film later on, was a mind-blowing experience, I got to tell you.
Today, Andrew D. Bernstein, a legend in American sport photography, a man enthralled by making pictures.
I don't remember my children being born, but I remember my first print being born. And I hate to say that, and I hope my kids don't hear this.
We talk about the emotional state of being a photographer.
I mean, it must be how painters feel, or anybody who works with marble. If you read about Michelangelo, he always talked about that. He always knew when he saw a block of marble that there was something incredible inside of it. It just had to come through him.
We learn about what drew him to one sport in particular.
I guess basketball found me rather than I found basketball, really.
We talk about the skills required for making pictures of sport that keeps you on the edge of your seat.
It's a fast-moving game, but I got to tell you, Neil, it's not as fast as ice hockey. And I sort of honed my skills on shooting action, shooting a lot of ice hockey.
We chat about how to get the perfect slam dunk shot, the big picture everybody wants.
What these guys can do when they're flying towards the rim, it's almost defying gravity, quite frankly.
Yeah.
And, keep in mind again that I get one shot at it.
We learn about Andrew's enduring professional and personal relationship with the late, great Kobe Bryant.
This kid was something else. I mean, I met him on Media Day 1996. Comes on my set. He's 18 years old. I'd never met him. I heard a lot of hype about him.
And inspired by the Black Mamba, as Kobe was famously known, Andrew talks about the highs and lows of making sport pictures.
And like Kobe used to say, I can't dwell on the shots that I didn't make, because there's always going to be the next one.
And what about breaking into the world of sports shooting?
With the advent of social media, all the websites that are out there, all the fan sites, there's more opportunity, I think, now. If the talent is there, if the drive is there.
Stories of life told by photographers. And today that photographer is Andrew D. Bernstein.
If you love a sport, just don't stop shooting it. Don't stop thinking about it. Don't stop planning around it. Go out and shoot.
Patron of the day today is another Andrew Clark. I'll link to his work on Instagram, of course, in the famous show notes. Andrew featured in the February Photo Challenge for patrons, which was a self-portrait. A strong, almost at the coalface quality to his photograph. Wonderful, contrasty picture. Beautifully lit, exceptionally intense, and I'll link to that one too, for the price of a fancy large latte per month. Patrons are helping to build and keep this podcast as a 3-day-a-week full-length photography show. All patrons get to hear the extra Tuesday and Thursday shows, which feature additional parts of interviews where guests tackle the new Columbo file questions. That just one more thing question. We're proud too to be supported by mpb.com, the place to go if you want to buy, sell and trade quality used camera gear online in the US, Europe and UK. Releasing my inner Greta for a moment, quality used gear is a way of driving the circular economy, and of course this makes it a sustainable way to shop too. And this is the kind of thing I like, because some companies treat plastic and unnecessary packaging, you should hear me shouting at the television, as if it's just normal. Not MPB. I bought a lens recently and it came with a note which said, each year MPB saves 1,200 football pitches worth of plastic bubble wrap by using recycled packaging. It's a small change, but it adds up to a big difference. And that is another reason why I entirely believe in driving the circular economy by buying used from mpb.com. So, to Andrew D. Bernstein, my guest today. He is a legend among sports photographers in America, particularly the NBA, of course. He was involved in the creation of NBA Photos in 1986, which is the worldwide leader in licensing of NBA photography. He was the senior director, actually, of NBA Photos from the 80s to 2011. Thousands of newspaper and magazine covers worldwide have featured his pictures, as well as major advertising campaigns he shot for Nike and Reebok and Pepsi and Coca-Cola and GlaxoSmithKline, and the list would go on. He co-authored Journey to the Ring with legendary Hall of Fame NBA coach Phil Jackson and collaborated with 5-time NBA champion Kobe Bryant, the late Kobe Bryant, on the worldwide best-selling book The Mamba Mentality, How I Play. A unique look at Brian's 20-year amazing career through the lens of this man, Andrew D. Bernstein. I don't know where to start, Andrew. I think we need a week, to be honest, but you're going to need to hold my hand slightly when it comes to NBA, because whilst we speak the same language in one way, when it comes to sport, we may need a translator further on.
I'm happy to be that conduit, my friend. Whatever I can do.
You are the classic dad bought me a camera story. I know your dad was a doctor, but he did fancy himself as a photographer as well, didn't he?
Well, my dad fancied himself as a lot of things. Professionally, he was a doctor. He was a wood carver, amazing craftsman with wood.
Wow.
He was a great street hockey player. You know, he used to play on the street. Great tennis player, my dad was, and he fancied himself as a photographer. When I was a little kid, we have all these Super 8 movies of me and my siblings and family, you know, and my dad always shot that. He never had aspirations to be a photographer, but he loved photography. He loved the creative aspect of it and the technical stuff. And yeah, lo and behold, you know, when I was 14, he bought me a camera, and we took a trip out to the Western United States where I had never been. You know, I'm born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, city guy. You know, seeing this incredible nature in front of me and having a camera to be able to translate that into a photograph, you know, what I'm seeing through the camera and then, you know, actually seeing it on film later on was a mind-blowing experience. I got to tell you, it was a long time ago. It was about 49 years ago that happened, but it's stuck with me ever since.
Was it as romantic as I like to think it was, that you thought at that moment, Andrew, this is how I need to dedicate my life, or was it not quite so clear-cut?
Well, I knew it was something I was interested in. I was interested in a lot of things at that age. I was interested in sports. You know, I played a lot of sports growing up in the playground, you know, stickball as we call it. Played baseball. Played tackle football in the winter on concrete, as I remember, you know, in the city. A lot of pickup basketball, a lot of street hockey, and I was a little guy. I was the shortest guy in my neighborhood, but I never took that as kind of a negative. You know, I always looked at it as sort of something that gave me a little bit of an edge because I was faster than everybody else, quite frankly. But I never had any aspirations or any false dreams that I would become a varsity player of any kind. But I love sports, and then I love photography. So in high school, the joke about me was I always had a camera around my neck all the time in high school. And I went to a big high school. We had a lot of activities. I was exposed to shooting a lot of stuff there. We had a newspaper. We had a yearbook. I was the photo editor of those, of course. We had, you know, drama and athletics and all kinds of things. So, you know, I really kind of honed my interest and then decided that I wanted to take photography as something I was interested in. I don't necessarily know if it was going to be my career per se. I actually had my sights on becoming a documentary filmmaker in high school. I ended up going to University of Massachusetts, which didn't have either things, actually, as fate would have it. They didn't have photography, and they didn't have documentary filmmaking, you know. But I had a great time at UMass, and we had a daily newspaper there on campus. It was a very prestigious 5-day-a-week paper. And that's where everything sort of gelled and sort of solidified in terms of my direction.
Tell me you still have that camera you walked those corridors with.
Oh, I wish I did, Neil. I wish I did. It was probably one of that and my mom throwing away my collection of baseball cards when I moved out to college. The two things I probably regret the most.
Well, I've asked of late about those first times a print came alive in the dark room, and I know, and I've read enough about you and heard you talking about the dark room with such a romanticized in such a romanticized way that I'm wondering, just like that first camera, whether you'd remember that first print that came alive in the tray.
You know, I honestly I don't remember my children being born, but I remember my first print being born. And I hate to say that, and I hope my kids don't hear this, but I truly remember it. I mean, I remember, you know, making that trip with my dad at 14, coming back home, then starting I believe it was my sophomore year of high school, 10th grade. And I had a very good friend. His name was Andrew Feldman, and he loved photography too. And he said, "Hey, my dad built us a darkroom in our basement. And in New York, we had basements, and it was an old utility closet or something. And he showed me how to develop the film, the black and white film, and then how to, put it in the enlarger and the whole thing and the whole process under the safe light, the orange light. And Neil, I tell you, it was something, man. I put that first print, the paper, into the developer solution in the tray. And I say this all the time, but it literally, to me, was a magic trick. I mean, you take a blank piece of paper, put it into a solution, and here comes, right before your eyes, the photo that you took, that I took in the camera. I mean, it was like the most insane thing. I had to kind of pinch myself that I actually created this thing out of nothing. I mean, it must be how painters feel, or anybody who works with marble. If you read about Michelangelo, he always talked about that. He always knew when he saw a block of marble that there was something incredible inside of it. It just had to come through him. I'm not equating myself to Michelangelo, but I'm saying that out of a blank piece of paper, with some kind of, emulsion on it, put into a solution, comes a piece of art that, you created in your brain, translated through the camera.
Well, we're going to have to fast forward just a little bit here because I'm intrigued as to how... Well, I'm intrigued as to why it was basketball, because, as you say, you had such a lot of interest in all sorts of sport, which has led now to a podcast we'll talk about in a little while, which gives you a chance to talk about more sport. But you chose NBA, you chose basketball. Take me through that transition process of becoming professional, and then why basketball?
Yeah, great question, Neil. And you're the first person to actually ever ask me that question, I must tell you. So good job. What happened, Neil, was that I was not a basketball fan growing up in New York. I was a baseball fan. I was a hockey fan. I played basketball like we all did in the schoolyard and in my driveway. But I think I went to one New York Knicks game my entire life growing up in New York, whereas I went to a lot of Mets games. I went to a lot of Ranger games at Madison Square Garden with my dad. But I ended up transferring from the University of Massachusetts, which I loved being there, but I wasn't learning the craft and the science and all the aspects of photography that I really needed to learn if it was going to become a career. So I made a big decision in my junior year there to transfer to Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, California. And that was a very hardcore commercial art school. Sports photography was not something that they actually encouraged at all. They actually discouraged. But while I was there, Neil, I was introduced by one of my teachers to some Sports Illustrated photographers, and they took me out into the field, so to speak. And I helped them with every imaginable sport, football, baseball. We were doing all kinds of portrait assignments. But I really gravitated to the indoor sports of ice hockey and basketball because I was taught very early as an assistant how to do this specialized technique of putting strobes, big, gigantic flash units, in the catwalks, in the ceilings of arenas to light these indoor arenas. Yeah. And I found that to be fascinating. I found it to be a niche that no one was doing except for Sports Illustrated. It's expensive. It was tedious, laborious work. That was my niche, that I was able to get my foot in the door with people at the Lakers and the Kings who played at the Forum at that time. I sort of made friends with some people from the NBA. And lo and behold, I'd be honest with you, my first assignment for the NBA was the 1983 All-Star Game, which was at the LA Forum. Still wasn't particularly a basketball fan, quite honestly. I actually loved shooting hockey. I loved shooting football and baseball. But I guess basketball found me rather than I found basketball, really, because I was in the right place at the right time. The Lakers Showtime era was really being born in that moment. One thing led to the other with the NBA, and I just started doing games and schlepping these big strobes all over the country, quite frankly, putting them in, taking them out. I was a one-man band for a long time. But that was where I really kind of hung my hat. And quite frankly, that's where my most dependable income came from. So,
because it's fair to say at that time, there wasn't really, I don't think there was, certainly the NBA did not have some sort of system to document it the way that you do it now. There was no archive for a start. I found that amazing that there was no archive of that sport, which you've now been a major part of course.
Yeah. No, it's true, Neil. It was really the wild, wild west, actually, of sports photography back then. Back then we were all basically freelancers, all of us throughout the country, and we were all competing with each other for whatever magazines or trading cards. And the NBA, you're correct, did not have an archive. David Stern became commissioner in '84, and one of his first mandates as commissioner was, we need to archive this league, both on video and in still photography, and not only going forward, but going back in time. Let's start, cultivating all the archives that are out there, the people who contribute to us. Let's go through whatever we have, And NBA Photos was born out of that sort of mandate by myself and a very, very good friend of mine, Terry Lyons, who was the one of the PR directors, public relations directors of the league at that time.
You had to break down all kinds of barriers, though. There wasn't just that archiving process. There was also getting the teams and the league to understand that as a photojournalist, you could bring a lot to it. So straight away, you had to go about talking to the bosses of the teams to make sure that they could give you the access that you needed. Because without that access, you didn't have half as much. You just had, you had by the court, but you didn't have any of the stuff behind the scenes.
Very true, Neil. But keep in mind, one of the real selling points, and it really wasn't a selling point to the teams, was that if you're a team public relations director, and back then those PR directors did everything for the team, with publicity, with content, with magazines, whatever they were doing, which wasn't a lot, you were only seeing the photography from your team photographer in your building. So if you're like the Chicago Bulls or the Detroit Pistons or, Atlanta Hawks PR director, you're only seeing your team photographer's photography. So one of the great aspects of NBA Photos was, now you're going to be able to have access to all 29 other teams' photography through this wasn't online at the beginning, but it was through one central clearinghouse for NBA photography, which was in the office there in Secaucus, New Jersey. So the teams loved that. The teams loved the fact that they could see their team on the road, and teams loved the fact that we were, all very professional, that they could trust us to be behind the scenes. Keep in mind, to this day, this is 2021, there are probably at least half of the team photographers are in 35 to 40, almost 40 years of experience. So it's, we've all had a lot of longevity. The younger generation has done a great job sort of picking up, where we kind of led the way, the bunch of us. And the access issue has changed over the years. There was a golden period of access, quite frankly, that was back in, the late 80s to probably the early 2000s. That's changed dramatically because teams now employ their own content people. But, no complaints from me. I had a great run, behind the scenes with some incredible franchises and some incredible moments. So, I'm just thrilled and grateful for that.
How did you, I know you've worked as team photographer for quite a few teams, but the one that really obviously sticks out is the Lakers.
It's going to sound kind of, cliche, but I'm actually a lifelong fan of the game. Yeah. I love the NBA game itself. You could send me to a game tomorrow in a city that I rarely go to against with two teams I don't really see, and I would still enjoy it and love it because I love the sport. I love the players. I love everything about doing what I do. And yes, I was around the Lakers during the incredible Showtime era, and I have to thank Pat Riley, Magic Johnson, but also people from the front office, people like Jerry West and Mitch Kupchak, who really helped me, a young photographer, gain a lot of confidence. And, I built a lot of trust in those early days with them. Integrity goes a long way. And, once Shaq and Kobe, that era started with Phil Jackson, I was already, Kobe's rookie season, I was already 13 years in as an NBA photographer, also the Lakers photographer.
It's such a fast-moving game. I mean, I heard you say, I love the way you describe it. You say it's amazingly graceful, it's artistic. How do you set out, though, to make pictures of it? I mean, what's your game plan when you turn the camera on and start to shoot? Because, I mean, from what I see, okay, so here's an English bloke's interpretation of watching your game. It's fast. A lot of what they do is designed to confuse, to confound, to get round, to completely mislead the opposition. And as I watch it, I'm thinking, well, I don't really know what they're going to do next, but you've got to photograph it and know what they're going to do next.
Well, Neil, you sound exactly like me when I had to start shooting soccer for the first time, which is very early, and which you call football, of course, but we can't call it football because it would be too confusing. But when I started shooting soccer as a very young sports photographer, that's my first job as a team photographer for any team, was the long defunct Los Angeles Aztecs of the North American Soccer League. It was the first time, soccer really came to the U.S. in a professional way. Yeah. I had no idea what the hell was going on. I mean, I'm out there, these guys are running around, and, 1 minute they're like a mile away, the next second they're like right on top of you. I had to learn what kind of equipment to have. The games I shot were played in a stadium, in the Rose Bowl Stadium, at night. They never played during the day, which had the most horrendous lighting that you'd ever see in your life. And, we're shooting, of course, on film, and the film wasn't good enough to, really push, so you could stop the action. It was a nightmare, absolute nightmare. And then fast forward almost 40 years later, I started shooting soccer again for the local MLS team here. And it's called LAFC. And I had the same experience, so I'm thinking, well, it's a little bit like hockey, they got a few more guys, but it's like sort of like that. But with basketball, you're right. It's a fast moving game, but I got to tell you, Neil, it's not as fast as ice hockey. And I sort of honed my skills on shooting action, shooting a lot of ice hockey and playing it, but also shooting it in my early career. And with hockey, you're limited to this little hole that's about this big. You can just barely get your lens through there, and you have very little space. And shooting hockey then on strobes is like the most challenging thing of all time, because you only get one shot. You get one shot every 4 seconds. Strobes have to recycle back up, then you can shoot again. There's no motor drive or anything. So when I started shooting more and more basketball, I sort of had that training. I had the ill-fated soccer training, and then I had the hockey training as a photographer. Plus, I had shot so many other sports that I felt like my action was good. But I found, Neil, that I have to be very focused. I have to be very concentrated. I can't have distractions around me. I have great assistants who just make sure technically that everything's working. I don't have to worry, like, is that camera firing? Is that strobe broken? Is this cord not, doing what it does? I have an incredible team here. One assistant named Tyler Ross, who has learned everything he needed to learn to operate and set up this system. And it's a complex system of multiple cameras that we do, and transmitter units and all kinds of things.
How hard are you on yourself as a photographer? And this is a bit of a loaded question, actually.
Well, I got to tell you, I think I've evolved, I hope. There have been times in my career where I have missed something, and sometimes it's out of my control, obviously. Michael Jordan will go in for a dunk and maybe his arm will be in front of his face, or a referee will get in front of me, or, but when it's what I feel within my control, timing, focus, composition, and I blow it, I have held on to those moments for a long time. It's incredibly anti-productive to do that. Yeah. And like Kobe used to say, I can't dwell on the shots that I didn't make, because there's always going to be the next one. So I'm not hard on myself really anymore.
So have you gotten over the Olympics where it went wrong for you in the 80s?
Oh, Neil, you're killing me. I mean, how much research did you do on me, Neil? Come on. No, you know what, Neil? I got to tell you, I have not gotten over that. But look, it was a moment. There's absolutely no excuse.
Yeah.
But I will not make this as an excuse. I will make this as a teaching moment, all right, to your avid listeners out there, that know your equipment, okay? Know your equipment. If you're going to use a piece of equipment that you're not familiar with, give yourself some time to get familiar with it and learn it. And that is the lesson from that moment, because I was using a lens that I had not used before, and to use it, and sort of to have the arrogance, quite frankly, of thinking, I can just sit down and start using this lens when it's shooting available light at f2, as I remember. That was a mistake, quite frankly. So, you learn.
Well,
in life.
Let's move on from that moment then. One thing you are very good at doing, and you're very well known for doing, is getting the dunk shot. What makes the classic dunk shot? I mean, I know you're particularly proud of the Michael Jordan ones.
Yes, of course. I mean, dunking is such a special moment of the game. It's something that makes our game, I think, more fabulous than maybe any other sport, quite frankly, because what these guys can do when they're flying towards the rim, it's almost defying gravity, quite frankly.
Yeah.
And, keep in mind, again, that I get one shot at it. So I have to be incredibly disciplined in my timing and in my composition. Focus is something that I, can't even think about in the moment. It has to be innate, and it's really the timing and composition. So, I like to get a dunk at the apex of a dunk. Michael Jordan, with the ball cocked back, when it gets above the head, or even, after that, then it's too late. However, you have a guy like Shaq who used to dunk so powerfully and then basically almost hang on the rim that I had to train myself to wait for him. But guys like Jordan, you wanted to shoot early. You wanted to shoot Dominique Wilkins early. There were many dunkers like that. Kobe was so almost impossible to figure out, because I never knew what this kid was going to do, in his early career. And he'd be on a breakaway dunk, and there would be about 9 different possibilities. Seriously. I mean, reverse dunk, tomahawk dunk, backwards dunk, underhand dunk, whatever. I mean, so you just got to hope for the best. You hope that you're timing it correctly, and hopefully the magic will happen through the camera.
I feel I should be calling time out. For the full 1 minute 15 I'm allowed by the law of the game. We're back with Andrew D. Bernstein in a moment. If you haven't yet, be sure to join our Facebook group, which is growing. Just search for Photography Daily. It's a ticket-only group to make another nod to basketball. Just as long as you're wearing appropriate footwear for the court, we'll let you in. You don't have to be a pro photographer. In fact, many of the members do this thing just for the absolute love of it. So you'll find that unlike some groups, there's no point scoring. Oh, come on, Neil. Unless you're slam dunk. No, we're going to have to stop this NBA reference thing now. So, just great people. Happy to talk about this thing called picture making that we love. Also, a place where you can leave questions or thoughts for the Friday Photo Walk. Just before I promise no more puns, we return to Andrew. Our friends at Studio Ninja want to remind you that their studio management software still has a 50% off offer for the first year of use. If you use the code PHOTODAILY50, that's the numerical 50, PHOTODAILY50, when you go to studioninja.co. Links on the show page, of course. News of a special legend, another legend of photography coming up at the end of today's show, who'll be appearing next week. Meantime, let's return to Andrew D. Bernstein. Well, you mentioned Kobe, and I can't possibly conduct an interview with you without spending a bit of time talking about him, because you had such a special relationship with him. I mean, you made his rookie headshot. You've made a lot of rookie headshots in your career, I know. But you say you kind of knew that he was going to be special from the outset.
Absolutely, Neil. This kid was something else. I mean, I met him on Media Day 1996. Comes on my set. He's 18 years old. I'd never met him. I heard a lot of hype about him. And like any young player or player I haven't shot before, I go in and introduce myself. I want to be respectful. And I say, "Hey, Kobe, I'm Andy Bernstein. I'm your team photographer." And he looks me right in the eye as he's shaking my hand. He goes, "Well, I know who you are." I saw in that moment, I'm like, okay, how's that possible? Because we never met. And he said, "Well, I had all your posters in my room growing up."
Yeah.
Which, the photo credit, if there is a photo credit on a poster, I don't even know if they make posters anymore, but back in the day, is so small. I mean, it's like minuscule. You can't even see it to the naked eye, quite frankly. And the fact that this kid, he's a kid, took the time to examine every ink drop on that poster, including the photo credit, and then knew from one poster to the next, like who this guy was who shot these posters. That just blew me away, honestly. In that moment, okay, this kid's pretty special. He's going to be a good one.
But he was 18. You were 38, weren't you? Just had your children.
That's right.
But this relationship forms between you, and I wonder how that came about, because it became such a special relationship throughout his entire playing career, didn't it?
Absolutely, Neil. I saw something in him in that moment, but then, of course, during his rookie season, that reminded me so much of myself at his age, driven with his craft like I was, a little bit over anxious to get to the next level, and sort of not being able to do that only because in my case, I had to sort of incrementally earn my way up the ladder, in my profession. Yeah. In his case, he was held back by, I guess, because he was a young rookie and the coach at the time did not play young rookies. That was not his thing. And, I think we sort of subconsciously bonded that way. At least I did. But then I saw him, second year, third year, I saw him turn into this sort of seasoned professional, and his real coming out party was the All-Star game in New York. I think it was his rookie year. And you could just see that there's something heads and shoulders different about this kid, And then I started I was traveling a lot with the team, and I would see how he would conduct himself and his work ethic, which was second to none, quite frankly. I was just so lucky to be allowed into his world. Like I said earlier, by the time, he came along in 96, I had been working for 13 years for the Laker organization. And so he knew about my history with Magic and with Pat Riley and with the organization. So it was a natural, as long as I didn't screw it up, there was a natural progression to the next era, which was the Shaq and Kobe era. And the organization, was very clear that I can be around them as long as I don't distract and I don't, make an issue of myself and document them, in the best light possible. And then, fast forward, he becomes a dad. And that was the real transition I saw in him from basically, a teenager, young adult, in the early 20s to a real man, a real family guy who then could sort of compartmentalize his life. He didn't have to be 100% obsessed with basketball all the time. He had a family now, and he became a family man. He became a dad. And then the whole Mamba persona came into be, and I could see him be a ruthless assassin on the court, and then an hour later walk out of the arena with his wife and daughters and just be a regular dad. And we talked a lot about that. I had I have 3 daughters and a son. He had 3 daughters at the time. And when it came time to do our book together, it was natural, I think, hopefully for him, that I would be the one that he would trust to do this book with him, to tell his story from his words.
Well, the Mamba Mentality is the book you're talking about. And he trusted you to tell that story. And it's a phenomenal book in its detail as well. I love the way that he sketched his thoughts across the the pictures. Whose idea was that, by the way? Was that his?
That was my idea, quite honestly. We had a great editorial director who really helped shape the book and sat down with Kobe and did the actual interviews with Kobe. Yeah. All the entire book is in Kobe's words, but of course it had to be, shaped and edited and all that. And Kobe wanted to talk specifically about things that were going on in my photos, right? Which also was pretty revealing because I never really had met anyone who looked at my photos as a scientific experiment, like dissecting that, and which he did. I mean, he didn't see photos, as he used to call, beautiful photos. He saw them as ways to learn, right? We found the best way for him to really get across what he wanted to say was just make 8x10 prints of photos and put them in front of him with a Sharpie and say, write what you're thinking as you see this picture. Just write on it. And of course, we used a bunch of those in the book. This is right from his mind, right from his hand. And again, he was seeing things in those photos that I've shot a lot of basketball. I've been around a lot of incredible players, but I don't know X's and O's and strategy and body language and all that stuff, even though I've been around it a long time. And the things that he was able to see and point out, I think what we've heard is that, that's been incredibly helpful to everyone from young players, coaches, parents, into, even the pro ranks. I've had pro players tell me, man, I saw that picture in the book of Kobe and Jordan, and I actually learned how to play defense from that photo. That's crazy.
If someone is not obsessed by what they do, we don't speak the same language. I mean, I could sit here all afternoon and reel off Kobe quotes. But that's one that I've heard you use on a stage when you were talking. It must have had, I can't imagine what a positive influence it must have had in your day-to-day to be with this man.
Oh, yeah, unbelievable. I mean, look, I was as obsessed with my craft as he was with his. And he saw that. And in an interview we did together, I remember he just looked over at me. He goes, "You're as crazy as I was, man." I mean, it's like being crazy with your profession. Yeah. Kobe respected that, I think, more than anything from people, that no matter what you did, if you were obsessed with what you did, and yes, there are downsides of being obsessed. You need to be able to let go. You need to be able to move on from things, not hold on to stuff. But that sort of desire to always get better, the relentless pursuit of greatness, all that stuff, all the tenets of the Mamba mentality, curiosity being probably one of the biggest of the top of the four tenets, always being curious about your craft, but also curious about the other guy.
We now have information about at least one of those passengers who has died in that helicopter crash. It has been confirmed. CNN is able to tell you now that NBA star Kobe Bryant was on board that helicopter.
News reports are just coming in. Among multiple victims, Kobe Bryant on that helicopter.
The 41-year-old Kobe Bryant was reportedly traveling with 4 others in that aircraft, in that helicopter. The LA County Fire Department saying
obviously it's a difficult memory, but do you remember finding out about the accident?
Oh, absolutely, Neil. I was actually in this office on the other side of the wall in my personal office area. And it was a Sunday morning, as we know, and my Sunday routine, pre-COVID, my Sunday routine, if I didn't have an afternoon game on the Sunday, would be I take my daughter to her Temple school class, and Sunday morning is always my wife's time for her, do her thing and just chill after a long week. And I take my daughter to her Temple school, I drop her off, and then my office probably at 10 minutes from there, I would go to my office and just clean up stuff for the week or get ready for the next week, or, and my MO is always to turn on very loud Springsteen music and, doing menial, tedious things, whatever. And don't answer my phone. Nobody really needs to speak to me then. But my phone is sitting like on my desk, and it's vibrating like off the desk. I mean, it's just vibrating one after, and people. So I know it's different calls. Yeah. Finally, after the third or fourth time, I look over, And there's 10 text messages. Is it true about Kobe? Is it true about Kobe? And I'm like, I don't know what that means, I'm honestly thinking like Kobe announced that he's coming back to play or something. I couldn't fathom that something bad happened to Kobe. And just as I'm scrolling through, my boss, Joe Amati, called me and he said, you have a TV in your place? I said, yeah, I actually have one right in front of me. He says, turn it on. And there was, CNN had just reported confirming the helicopter crash. And I was just literally in shock. I mean, I had never felt that kind of shock before. I never lost anybody in that shockingly of a way. It was unbelievable. But then I was committed. I had to go back and pick up my daughter. So I'm listening in the car the whole way, of course. And I don't even know how I drove over there and picked her up and was praying that she hadn't heard. I wanted her to hear from me. But of course, the whole place had heard by that point. And we get in the car and start driving home on the freeway, listening. And in that moment, that 5 minutes into the drive, they announced that Kobe's daughter, Gigi, was with him. And I had to pull over on the freeway. I had to pull over to the emergency lane and just lost it. I mean, it was like, this tidal wave of grief and shock. And I know millions of other people shared, similar experiences, and still, it stays with me, stays with everybody. But I got to tell you, Neil, I'm so encouraged, first and foremost by Vanessa, Kobe's widow, and how she, through all the grief, has managed to stay incredibly strong. I mean, publicly, with 3 other daughters there and having to raise them now, and knowing that the whole world is still in shock and grieving. And when she was able less than a month later, to stand up in front of the world and eulogize him, it was, and her and Gigi, of course. That blew my mind, honestly. I'm in touch with her now because we're starting to work together on something, and just completely, I guess, I'm honored to be still in the Bryant world. But I have to say that everyone is, especially in the LA area, as you know, this outpouring of grief through creative energy, all these murals that have gone up all over Los Angeles, but now all over the world, Neil. You probably have them in London. Yeah. And my good friend Mike Asner tracks these murals throughout the world. I think there's about 500 or so murals, and every day he learns of new ones. Yeah. So that's been incredibly wonderful to see how the world has come together, especially during this ridiculously tough year of COVID and pandemic and social unrest and everything that's gone on. But the love for Kobe and Gigi, it's just astounding. And I actually have, literally to my left, outside the door, I have a mural going up outside my office, which will be completed before the 5th anniversary of Kobe's last game on April 13th.
What a wonderful thing to look out the window at every
absolutely.
Single day. So look, in terms of the future, I'm sure it's a question asked over and over, but those seeking to be in this sport, or indeed, and we're going to talk briefly about your podcast in a moment as well, or indeed any other, to make their mark and be part of documentation of a sport, what's your advice?
Well, it's a different world now, Neil. When I was a young freelance photographer, and it was not easy, but it was easier to get credentials. It all starts with the credential. You got to be able to get into a match or a game. It was easier back then, quite frankly, and now it's much more restrictive. Even if you watch old video of NBA games, the baselines were full of photographers. We could have 40 photographers or 50 photographers on the baseline, on each side going up the sideline. Now there's 4, there's 6, right now in the pandemic, there's 2. There's 2 photographers at every game on the floor, and that's it. One is the content person for the team, and the other is myself or whoever happens to be the team photographer there. So things have changed, but with the advent of social media, all the websites that are out there, all the fan sites, there's more opportunity, I think, now. If the talent is there, if the drive is there, and first and foremost, at the top of the list has to be integrity. You cannot do anything in life, in business, without having integrity, because no one will hire you, and unless you're independently wealthy, most people need to earn a living doing what they love to do. In my case, photography. You have to be a genuine person. You have to come through with promises that you make. You have to meet deadlines. You have to treat people respectfully. You have to have, the big I word, integrity. So I've prided myself on that throughout my career. I've tried to live up to that. I've tried to instill that in the people working with me. And, my advice to young photographers, if you love a sport, just don't stop shooting it. Don't stop thinking about it. Don't stop planning around it. Go out and shoot. Doors will open if you keep knocking on enough doors and you reach out to people you admire. If there's a sports photographer whose work you want to emulate or admire, it's so easy now on Instagram to just find photographers and reach out to them. Photographers like me, we love to hear from people who love our work and what can I do to help your career and pay it forward? Because guess what? I was there once too, and I had somebody, the great Neil Leifer, literally one of the godfathers of sports photography, if not the godfather, who helped me, a young photographer who he didn't even know at the time, helped me gain confidence and encouraged me and looked at my work. And Neil and I actually talked this past weekend. I've known Neil now, 45 years. Don't ever be afraid to ask. Some people will be more receptive than others, but don't get discouraged. And you see a crack in the door, make sure you stick your foot in it. Because, a door can easily open as it can close on you.
Absolutely.
Okay?
That's good.
And that's something I learned from my career.
Yeah. Look, you are a legend in your career, and you're the host of a show called Legends of Sport now. Are you having fun being a podcast host?
I absolutely love it, Neil. I didn't think it would be something that would be in my wheelhouse.
Well, you're very good at it. You're very good at it.
But probably like you, I just love talking to people and hearing their stories. And everybody's got a story. You could be the last guy on the bench or the biggest star on the team. You started somewhere, right? And somebody helped you, and there was some pivotal moment in your life or your career. And I love to uncover that. Part of the mission of Legends of Sport is to bring out these stories, and we're helping to document and perpetuate these legendary icons of sport, as well as moments in sport or even famous venues, in sport. Like I'm fascinated with Wimbledon, for example. I would love to have somebody on who was an expert about Wimbledon or Fenway Park or Yankee Stadium, So, we're committed to bringing these stories out and bringing them out to the public. We celebrate athletes and people around the game, from owners and trainers, broadcasters, of course, athletes. It doesn't matter. If you're connected to sport, we want to talk to you.
I wonder if somebody came into your office tomorrow and you asked them the question, what are you into musically? Whether, if they didn't mention Bruce Springsteen, at least within the first 10 seconds, whether it would be a bit of a deal breaker for you.
Well, I have to say I'm a little bit more tolerant than that, okay? I do have a 12-year-old who listens to music that I have no idea what the hell she's listening to, but she's become a Bruce fan, quite honestly, and can sing the words along with me. So I have respect, for other people and other people's wish list and love of music, of course, just like I do in sports. But if you're a Bruce fan, that's a big help.
Do I dare say, born in the USA? No, don't, Neil. My thanks to Andrew D. Bernstein. Absolute pleasure talking to him. And that's it for today. Keep sending your questions or your feedback to studio@photographydaily.show so that I can feature you in the mailbag edition, which is the Friday Photo Walk. Remember, you can also send in pictures from your own photo walks to appear on the episode's show page online. And on that note, be sure to visit today's website show page for links to what you've heard today, Patreon, our sponsors, and everything talked about. You'll find a link on the description in your podcast player app. Next Wednesday, named as one of the top 20 most influential fashion, portrait and celebrity photographers ever. Albert Watson is my guest. Music in the show was from artlist.io, and I look forward to photographing with you, hearing from you and talking with you next time.
Photography Daily is a Loading Zone production.